we go. Look at that.
It's working now. That's good. All right. Good to go. Well, okay, so ignore the title because I'm an ex-techie. I just made the move to the dark side a few years ago when VMware launched Cloud Foundation to the general public, and I've been doing VMware Cloud Foundation now for over 3 years, and we variously succeed and fail with it as a product. But actually, what it's really more about what it enables than what it is. And hopefully when I go through this, you'll understand that it's not so much the technology and the architecture, but the benefits that it provides. And I thought, well, a good way of presenting that would be against the 5 Rs. Now, you may have seen 7 Rs, you may have seen 6 Rs, but 5 Rs is easier to fit into 45 minutes. So I chose the one platform and the 5 Rs as kind of my as my item here. With business transformation, it's very much an application-centric approach. And if you're not part of your organization's digital transformation, then inevitably somebody else is. And as consumers, technology makes our lives easier. And then by digitizing every possible facet, then we can be more productive, potentially more profitable, with plenty of spare time on our hands, so we can live better lives. VMware's always been there as has always believed in a tech as a force for good, and we support that vision and agree businesses should strive for that desired end state. But it's not, the 5 Rs are not the be all and the end all. But when we look at our customers, very few of them are perhaps as far along that journey as they need to be. They're somewhere in the middle, maybe more towards the 80% side of things. And they're on that road, but they've still got a long way to go. And as they go along, take that journey, they hit some challenges. And often those challenges are because it's been looked at in many different ways. And if we take a look at it slightly differently from an application perspective, rather than an infrastructure that supports that application, or whether it's cloud first, public cloud first, it's a better way of approaching digital transformation. And the other challenge is that they may be on that journey already, but technology doesn't stand still. Where you are at the moment is going to be different in the next 5 to 10 years. Something new will come along and change that all over again. So over time, organizations effectively accumulate applications. Many of them are on premises, but more and more frequently nowadays, those applications get deployed to the public cloud. And often in that scenario, out of sight of internal IT, and internal IT have lost track of that. They may never get it back under control. And I don't mean I don't mean that they've lost control as in it's not, they don't own and run it, but also they've lost control and they've lost some relevancy within the business. So a digital application, any business application, is then that link between the company and the consumer, and we need to be able to support that. And actually, in some instances, the application is the company. So the focus has to be on that application transformation to achieve a reasonable level of business transformation. And that's where VMware and Cloud Foundation have been focusing a lot of our attention, because it's not so much what we're doing on top of it. Sorry, what we're doing, but what we do it on top of. So thousands of customers are going through this process. And as I said, there were various iterations of this, but I've gone for the 5 Rs. Just to summarize those, we've got retain. Retain is keep an application as is, but improving the efficiency, gaining some operational savings, and operating it in a secure environment. Rehosting is moving those applications wholesale into the public cloud for whatever reason, whether that's the closure of a data center or some urgently required levels of scalability. Retire is shut it down, get rid of on-premises applications in favor of SaaS alternatives. Everybody is now doing Office 365. And most organizations were only ever consumers of HR systems, collaboration, etc., not developers of those. They supported a business function, but if there was a better way of owning them, then organizations jump quite quickly, because it removes blockers to digital transformation, because people aren't required to look after those locally installed applications anymore. It's then down to the vendor to deliver them. Replatform. This is to take an existing monolithic type application and rewrite it using cloud native methods. And finally, we have refactor and build new applications. So this is looking at the consumer service and building an application that fits those requirements. And that's really where most innovation is happening, using those refactor and build new applications. And as I said, there are most organizations are in some kind of transition. And where are your areas of focus now? What are you hearing? Are there areas which are more popular than others? Obviously, from a populist perspective, refactor and build new applications is absolutely. But there is still going to be a case to retain an application as it is. It may be that it does something very important for the business effectively and fantastically well. Why rewrite it and introduce a lot of risk? Or it could be that it is that MS-DOS based door access system that until you decide to buy a new door access system, it has to exist and remain until the end of days. So really, this is what we're focusing on, those 5 R's. So kind of moving along, what do they look like? Well, for retain and rehost, we're looking at those big traditional monolithic applications. Single large code base, long time to build, and a lot of effort to change. And once they're built, they often stay around for a very, very long time. Traditionally, you're looking at the likes of ERP systems or manufacturing solutions there, but sometimes those are more esoteric homegrown applications that, again, as I said, support some kind of function within a business. And particularly in the case of ERPs, they are designed for quite a long-term deployment that depreciates over many, many years. And they're still quite a large part of a lot of organizations. My time as a systems engineer, I spoke to organizations where traditional applications were not going to go away, but what was happening? They were building new applications to interface with them. So potentially that traditional monolithic application they then built hooks and APIs into it, so they didn't have to do a wholesale change, but they could stage things over time, figure out what worked for the consumers. And with modern applications, they are, well, I say they're termed modern applications, but it's a totally different approach. They're built on microservices, APIs, and just a distributed system of features and functions with a relatively small modular code base that can be switched in and out pretty easily, allowing for that faster levels of innovation. Now, in a monolithic application, a small change has potentially huge impacts. Good old hard-coded IP addresses, cross-references between features and functions within there that you think you can take one piece out and the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. If they do get updated, it's very infrequently. And the amount of effort to make those changes is huge. Long interdependency checking, integration, regression testing, quite a large effort. And when those upgrades do happen, the potential for a poor user experience is really, really quite high. And also, because they were often built quite some time ago, the potential for security threats is also can exceed their the benefit of keeping them as they are. But with modern applications, completely different. They have a consumer focus right from the day they're built. And in fact, the consumer experience often trumps that initial functionality. They're not thought about as the technology they consume. They're not thought about in the terms of containers or virtual machines or PaaS, or it's about what they provide. It's the services, the functions, the features that they offer. And due to the way that they're built, you can change them piece by piece quite easily in production, almost constantly, without suffering the issues and the testing and the levels of risk that are associated with those old traditional applications. But where modern applications really do help is that build, measure, learn cycle. The efficiency cycle, various names in there, but the idea is you build it, you measure and determine whether it's providing what it needs to, take learnings from that, and then implement those changes. And development for modern applications is generally product market based. And when I say market, that can be internal consumers, it can be the general public, it could be patients, it could be anybody who actually is the end user of that. It can even be business to business as well. So it's requirement driven rather than be built upon a kind of an end goal. That end goal can constantly change. But what it does allow you to happen is be more agile, be quicker to market, or quicker to provide the functionality and the features, and hopefully be first, and hopefully get more from it, get greater benefit. And this is not the platform. This is not the platform to go into VMware Tanzu portfolio or running OpenShift on top of VMware Cloud, but suffice to say, we're pretty good and understand a lot of that as well. So where there are benefits is, what about where should all the effort go? Well, as I said, most of the applications are still very traditional. 80% of them are very traditional, and the savings are, it's going to take a long time to realize any savings on those, particularly as they're so slow to change. New application, on the other hand, is getting the bulk of the investment, and from that perspective, the value to the business is significantly quicker. So from a value perspective, all the focus is on those new modern applications, but actually there's still savings to be had in the traditional applications without having to go through the whole retire, replatform stages. But whatever the case is there's an awful lot going on in the field, and often that's rather inefficiently. You end up seeing disconnected teams being responsible for quite specific or dedicated initiatives, separating at the infrastructure layer and creating silos, making any efficiencies very challenging to achieve. Quite recently, I met an organization that were tasked with saving 3 million in their IT operational budget whilst delivering new applications and services to the business, and they were really struggling to figure out where they could make savings, because every time they created something new, they were spinning up services in Microsoft Azure, and every time they built a new application, their Azure spend started to creep up, but they still had lots of on-premises requirements, because that's where the bulk of their operations happened. It was a call center like environment where you had multiple users all hitting one system, and distributing that was difficult, and changing it out while still servicing the customer requirement was going to be very difficult to do. So they ended up with all sorts of different use cases, all being deployed to what they thought at the time was the right location. So there has to be a different approach, and that approach is to go through this transformation in the most efficient way, and then come out at the end of it stronger than you did before you went in. But to do that, you need that single platform that can handle all of the initiatives that organizations have, but through a simple, agile, efficient platform that can span all environments and not prevent you from taking or from making best use of capabilities available in both traditional and modern application development. So if we now start to look at some of those 5 R's in detail, from a per application on the retain side, there are 3 areas that you can gain levels of efficiency. Uptime is one of them. Quite often those retain type applications are not even virtualized yet. It still shocks me that people are still running physical workloads on x86 hardware, where very few CPU cycles are consumed on an hourly, daily, weekly, monthly basis. You can automate more and focus on enhanced security and governance. Those are areas where you can make efficiencies on just keeping hold of I'm going to call it old stuff, but like I say, it doesn't necessarily be old. It could be something that is actually quite cool still and benefits the organization. So most siloed organizations would handle this kind of a request in a very similar way. Those applications run in a very hardware focused data center. Virtual servers, perhaps, but when it comes to storage and network, we're still looking at, or those organizations are still looking very hardware centric. So to make it more efficient, taking the old approach, they will build or populate a data center with a newer hardware centric approach. Same architecture because they know it works, they don't want to break it. But the performance is now is still on those hardware components with slightly better physical storage, slightly better physical network, no real benefits to operational efficiency, and certainly no savings because it's cost more to probably build that in the first instance. And that creates 3 main issues. It's still complex and resource intensive. It's not agile, absolutely not. And it limits what else the rest of the business, bearing in mind there are still 4 R's to be looking at, the rest of the business doesn't benefit from that at all. And that means that any workloads that do not fit that model will instantly go to public cloud, or IT will be asked to spin up new infrastructure that supports that those new initiatives. So, and that's because 80% of the resources, and I mean in this case human resources, are needed just to keep the lights on for those old applications. So the business then looks at those old applications and goes, they're fantastically expensive to maintain, so perhaps we should be looking to dispose of them, re-architect them, rebuild them, but perhaps they're looking at it from all the wrong reasons. 20% of that is focused on the business tasks, which is completely the wrong way around to look at it. But if IT understood what the business is trying to do, they'd be able to provide a value to that. So with one platform, we can help customers run applications in the most effective and efficient way using on a private cloud. So the first step is that data center modernization. Build a private cloud in your data center, co-location, whatever that may be, which delivers the same user experience to the business as it does to the public cloud, but using the VMware technology to migrate existing workloads into the new environment, but offering the same services that they require, the compute, storage, and networking, but in a new, more agile way. And that private cloud platform is standardized. So there's less engineering effort required to build it and maintain it. It's automated. So repetitive, call them mundane tasks, can all be automated and done on a push button or an API call basis. And that model can be used across multiple sites, giving you a common operating model over all of your private clouds. You may have multiple data centers, multiple locations, and that delivers the efficiency, the agility, and the security that those traditional applications benefit from, but without locking out new application development from consuming and using that platform. And that gives you the ability to, opportunity to then spend 20% of the time keeping the lights on and providing services, and 80% of the time delivering the business against the business focus. And that's really where we start to see some value, because we haven't increased the cost of running that old application, but we can now onboard new applications into the same infrastructure. It's not siloed. It's not dedicated to the task of running an old application. It can be shared. But we now move across to that rehost and migrate. And why is that done? Well, that is, again, many reasons. That could be for data center closure, it could be for scalability, but also often seen as cost efficiency, ease of use, and potentially simple access to additional services, whether that's content delivery networks, whether that's new application development or data analytics. And the way to do that is often to shift it into the public cloud. But again, that's not as easy as it looks at first sight. You have your application as it sits in your data center, but to get it into the public cloud, the native public cloud, it requires a level of reformatting. It's quite a complex task. The risk is always quite high. There's an awful lot of application validation that needs to go on beforehand to make sure you know what you're moving. And once it's there, there's no real value to the business. You haven't changed or improved that application in any way. In fact, you've potentially created more risk, because it's not under, that traditional application is no longer under IT control, or it's under IT control, but in a different format to what they're used to dealing with. And you've potentially gone into a complete level of vendor lock-in by choosing a cloud provider and a cloud provider's format. So it has limited benefit. And this is usually where VMware sees customers looking at their cloud spend, and panicking, because they thought it was going to improve, and actually it's not. It's not improved anything other than they were able to retire a data center. So with this one platform, it can do just that. Take those applications and put those into the public cloud on one of the partner services, VMware Cloud on AWS, Azure, Google, etc. It gives freedom of choice, because it's the same tools and same infrastructure. Its resource optimization is absolutely possible, and from a reversibility, I can always go back. I can always bring them back should it be required, whether that's new application development, whether that's just burst capability. So then we start to look at the more modern application side of things. Now, SaaS is a good one, because why would I say you can have this all on one platform? Well, bearing in mind, it's not just Cloud Foundation that I'm talking about today, but actually what the VMware Cloud, or one platform to do everything. When applications move to a SaaS model, they're not run on any platform that you own or manage or maintain, but deliver huge value. So through SaaS applications, what we can do is we can deliver additional value around that, around the secure access. So as Vernon was going through Workspace ONE, making sure that it's secure access of your application or the SaaS application, but also secure access for that application if it comes back into your data center for anything. And while that doesn't seem to be key, it shows that VMware can address all of these use cases. Now, when we move purely into the modern applications, this is pretty much what we see today. Customers have probably an app in at least 2 public clouds, if not more. Why? Because it wasn't the IT team that provisioned that application. It was marketing. It was new lines of business. They chose they chose the cloud that they were most familiar with, or it may have been they actually decided to run it in-house because it wasn't, they thought about this and decided that perhaps initially the public cloud wasn't the right place to go. But wherever you are with this, there's a lack of visibility when it moves outside of the data center, out of IT's control. And whether that can ever get back under IT control is hard to say. I have a good friend who works as the Chief Information Security Officer for a very for quite an interesting business, and his biggest concern isn't modern applications, or isn't his data center or access to the building or anything like that. It's the public cloud, because what they don't know what's out there, and they don't know of what's out there, what's accessible to their consumers. So his whole effort for the next 12 months is to make sure those applications, if they can't come back on premises, are absolutely understood and adhere to all of those requirements. But the level of effort for him to do this is high, because he needs to find every single application, every single team that may have deployed an application, and go and ask them what they're doing, and then get them to run through his levels of security validation to make sure that they didn't, or they haven't done something stupid. So with this model, developers are doing the infrastructure work. Well, they are not as focused on certainly on the security aspects as IT teams. They're not necessarily there for the cost benefits either. So, and ultimately, when this goes into production, developers are still running it, and they're spending more time running than they are developing, and that's a problem. So, and that's because they've introduced inconsistency. There is a team set up that are very, very good at running stuff, but because it's not part of that infrastructure, they are able to run. They are having to run it themselves. And it's that potentially that approach is inflexible. They've gone down not a blind alley, but they've gone down that route. They're back into vendor lock-in. With that one platform, there is a better way to do this. With modern applications, it's all about the agility, efficiency, security, and stability. And it can be done best with a common platform. And moving those applications to a new platform will have to be considered, both on a per application basis. Some applications may already be on cloud, built using cloud native technologies. So it needs to be easy to move it to that platform. Others may have chosen specific technologies. So perhaps we need to look at running them adjacent to those technologies, or recoding them slightly so that they can be more flexible. You might have put some effort to get them on that new platform. It may not make sense to move them to a new platform, so retain on the retain side, and then we're back to that original use case. But we can still support all of those use cases on top of that one platform. But that was focusing on existing environments. But if you're looking at new applications, we've got the situation where developers are building new applications. And if they're successful, they build new applications, more applications. And that application development may speed up as things, as applications are adopted and new features are added and more consumers come online and more people start using them because they've heard it's quite good. And again, they all have a preferred location to run that. It could be that they're running multiple clouds. But at the other end of the spectrum, there's that IT team who are taking care of the infrastructure, and that is complete separation. And it leads to developers doing infrastructure work and IT being missed out of the picture. But you can handle that with a single platform. If you give the developer the opportunity to do their work independently from the underlying infrastructure. And when you're looking at Kubernetes, particularly, the biggest challenge with Kubernetes is having control over the compute, the storage, and the network. If you abstract all of that away, they're no longer an issue. You can then focus on the services that sit on top of it and running and managing that infrastructure. The IT team doing their piece of work, provisioning the infrastructure and helping the developers consume. And in that scenario, both parties are doing what they do best, focusing on development. But actually, there are benefits that can be had by doing this. First of all, you've got that flexibility, the ability to move between clouds. No change in the workflow, yeah, but just the ability to choose a cloud service that mirrors or can support the same technologies as the private cloud. Developers choose where they want to deploy their app, but IT will have visibility and understand how that works so that they can apply any security policies, etc. to it. But if all of those environments run on that same software-defined foundation, you've got great portability. Things can be moved around. You've got less vendor lock-in. You can optimize your spend as required. If a particular business is doing well, but they need that burst capability, they can stay in the cloud. Anything else that's just ticking around, bring it back in-house without having to change that application in any way. Move it around as necessary. Now, one of the reasons to move into the cloud are those rich developer services, but we can connect those services into one platform as well. And we can do that through self-service blueprints, but also the approved workflows to get to have that cloud footprint, making sure that only the responsible adults are able to deploy. But when you put it all together, you have that one platform that can take an existing application and retain them in the most efficient way. It can take modern applications provisioned via the same platform to on-premises or in the public cloud. We've got the software-defined networking that enables connection of those applications to services on-premises as well as services in the public cloud. And it changes the organization. The organization brings the IT back into the line of business, getting them closer to the developer and helping them cooperate on a regular, permanent basis, working with a fully software-defined data center instead of a data center, and focusing on the business challenges and not the technology challenges. And that's what Cloud Foundation is there to achieve. It's not the parts, the components. It's about what it provides. And something that frustrates me, because Cloud Foundation is what I do day in, day out, is that if I'm providing a platform in the public cloud, whether that's Azure, Amazon, Google, Oracle, whoever, I don't often have an organization or an IT architect asking me how it hangs together and whether it will suit his use case. He will consume it. He or she will consume it. They won't ask me what backend storage do I use? What servers have I got? Do I make use of this particular protocol? So with Cloud Foundation, it's rather than looking at how it's built and how it hangs together, it's whether it provides me benefits to my business. And it helps secure access. So all of those applications, all of those end users and where they sit, making sure that that's secure. So IT, developers, everybody has secure access to what they need, where they need it, and nothing more. And it's more complicated now than it ever was. And there are, with all of those different those application types that are out there, it's a very difficult job to keep on top of it. Hence, more silos get created and more complexity is introduced. So when we're looking at this from a platform perspective, taking care of the access between those different layers, taking care of the access between those environments and those applications. And whilst that looks complex, it's still just that one platform. And that's really why VMware's mission statement has always been to build, run, manage, connect, protect any application on any cloud, on any device. Because if we look at that, it looks complicated, but it is as simple as having one platform, any cloud, with any application and any device with intrinsic security throughout. And that's pretty much what what I wanted to talk to you about today. There's one additional slide which I can put up if anybody wants to kind of understand a little bit more about VMware Cloud Foundation and the benefits that it provides. And if you want to, on a future session, I can go into a deep dive of what VMware Cloud Foundation is. Any questions that anybody has, please feel free to ask. And thank you very much for your time. Cool. Click on that. Can't hear you, Simon. Have I disconnected?
No, that's me being an idiot. You know what I said earlier about being mute button police? It's because I've got two mute buttons. I've got one in Zoom, and my headset doesn't work with Zoom very well.
You like a hardware. You've gone for the hardware.
I've got a proper hardware
mute,
button.
not the software mute.
Yeah, and it shoots me in the foot every day. So, is there any sort of space for a kind of workload analysis piece for VCF? Because I can almost, there's a kind of flow, right? There's understanding the applications that you've got on-prem and what kind of bucket you're going to put, which R you're going to put them in. Have you seen anybody do a kind of end-to-end flow with that? Because I could almost see an interesting, point at application, then have something in the middle deal with that application going to the right target platform. I mean, is that something VCF's geared up for doing, or is it a component part?
It would be it'd be outside of that. So Cloud Foundation, VMware Cloud, and Cloud Foundation being your on-premises self-managed version of it, it's just the infrastructure. Everything else around it is optional. So the infrastructure being compute, storage, networking, and the automation to own that. But from the supporting services around the vRealize, the wealth of vRealize solutions, I have had a few customers that have gone through kind of application analysis using different tools to work out how darn complex is their monolithic application. Because you talk about a single code base, but actually what often happens is that it has hooks into dozens of other systems and other applications. So that is not a candidate for being anything other than retained. But then there are others where maybe that step has already been made. It's an API access call. Years ago, I was involved in a very early project for one of the government agencies where back end was the good old traditional mainframe. And they had built into that was a text-based interface that allowed you to do a very specific thing in the context of what that particular agency did. And they started to build that as a new application, and they took that application and they put it into, at the time, I think it was Amazon was their preferred provider. And the application was effectively HTML5, early days HTML5, and they were using kind of a predecessor to our Cloud Health, so the vRealize Business, and they were very arrogant that putting it into the public cloud was going to be the best way to do this. But the way that users interacted with it meant that they spent, because of the way they built it, they spent more with those systems sat idle than they did with them being used. So that was one of those early days when you had the visibility to say, hang on a minute, this is costing you N in the public cloud, but if you brought it back into your data center, it would cost you nothing, because it's so infrequently accessed that even not admittedly not on the mainframe, but if you put it on any of your x86 hosts in your business, it would never tax them in the slightest. And it was simple things like that that quite often help with that, in that journey. It's understanding not should I, but it's not so much should I do it, but will I do it? Should I do it is always going to be a decision that gets made way above most of our pay grades. Will I do it is the balls to stand up and say, no, this makes absolutely no commercial financial sense. And there are not, I have yet to find a tool that can do that with aplomb. Any tool can tell you that this is a candidate for rehosting, whether that's in your own data center or in the public cloud. But what it doesn't tell you is ultimately, is that going to be the right thing to do? So there is an element of trusting your knowledge, trusting your experience, and understanding what the business is trying to do. And I think that's still one of the challenges we have in IT, is that we don't quite get what the business is trying to do. And that, that cloud first strategy is, I think every time I talk to a new organization, I get a new explanation of what that means. Initially, it was we're all going all in on Azure, and then it kind of nuanced slightly, but we're still going public cloud native. And now it's more, we'd like to operate like a cloud, but we can't see an easy way of doing that. So it's complicated, absolutely. But if you can have one platform that supports all your old traditional x86 applications, as well as the new development, then you're reducing the risk for a start. There's going to be an upfront investment. There always is in these things, but you're reducing a lot of the risk, because if it does require any of those cloud benefits, so that instant scalability, the global reach, those kind of things, then you're not, you haven't put yourself in a situation where it's an either or, it can be an and.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I see a lot of people essentially lifting and shifting workloads into the public cloud, and then suddenly expecting that to be magically cheaper or scalable. I mean, and that just doesn't work, right? You need to put the right workloads in the right way, and that's
the right cloud for the right.
I come up against
the right cloud for the right
repeatedly.
reason. Yeah, the right cloud for the right reason is absolutely is the right methodology to take. The right cloud for the right reason. And so from a VMware customer's perspective, we've got a few, unfortunately not referenceable, because it's their secret sauce, who've done the analysis between running it in-house and allowing basically free reign to their lines of business, versus letting those lines of business go out into the public cloud and do it. Mm-hmm. And even the ones that were early adopters of Cloud Foundation and have been through teething problems, even those have seen a decent saving over the years. And some of them are quite close to home, and one of them makes cars.
Yeah, I personally, I think it's interesting that I do this all day, right? So if people who move, particularly those who move IaaS workloads as is into the public cloud, right? Because you've suddenly got a massive amount of cost transparency, you're suddenly seeing all the cost that was really hidden from you on-prem because it was just provided, right? The fact you've got a switch port, you've got this much throughput, you've got a firewall that, on-prem, that's just a bulked together kind of capacity thing for all of the applications that are shared. Whereas I mean, in the cloud, it does a good thing in terms that it makes it highly visible to someone. So actually it makes the application owner think really about their application architecture and if that's the best way to run their application, rather than just pumping a bunch of data out of an interface because it was just available and the developer didn't really think about it. Yeah, but you know, the corollary of that is it suddenly looks really expensive. But you know, it's it's balance between the two. Yeah,
absolutely, and that's where I think that's where, when it comes down to understanding knowing what, doing a good analysis of current versus future versus the hidden stuff as well. You know, that's, as you say, switch ports, things like that. They're not often considered, but actually that can work to, that can be a risk moving into the public cloud, because all of those things you took for granted are no longer available. But also, if they are still critical for an application, can they be leveraged for new applications as well?
Sure. Cool.